I've never been compared to Shaq before in my life, so that's a very special moment for me. I'll try and do what I can. I don't even know anything about basketball. I think it's about the tallest team that wins. But I want to try and share with you guys a little bit about some of the themes that we've already heard a lot about today, and this idea of connection that I think in every presentation has kind of risen to the surface, at least for me. And how at our agency we've been trying to think about ways that we can enable better connections through our work, both with our clients and internally with our design and our development teams. So we'll start with a little story. There were two young fish swimming along one day, and they passed an older fish who gave him a big wink and a smile, and he said, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And then he swam on. And the two young fish kind of stopped and looked at each other the way young fish do nowadays, with a bit of a roll of the eye. And one said to the other, "What the hell is water?" That's a story that David Foster Wallace told a long time ago, and it's always stuck with me because I think it illustrates really powerfully how hard it is for us to really see and measure the context that we work within and that our work exists within. And when we think about the context that we've been in for the last 10, 15 or more years, it's been driven by digital. And so it's really, really important if you're going to be working in this kind of broad, evolving, complex context that you have a way to define that for yourself so you can take purposeful steps forward. And so for me, the definition that has really stuck through most of the work that I get to do is that digital is representing a new mode of engagement. And it makes new things possible that weren't possible before. And as designers and as builders, it asks new things of us. And I think as we start to embrace the complexity of digital, the more we feel like we're getting a handle on it, the more it starts to change and evolve. And I wanted to share a story that kind of really brought this home for me again very, very recently. We've been talking with a lot of our clients about where things are going in the future for their businesses and ours. And we talked about a lot of different things. And one of the things that really stuck with me was the idea of a vocal user interface. So that's when you speak to Siri or Cortana or any of those platforms. And obviously, that's incredibly useful. It gives you a great, access to information with absolutely no friction. Well, very little friction. And we'd also been talking about natural language generation, which for anyone who isn't up to speed on that is platforms like Quill that can take data and from that data create very, very convincing copy, paragraphs of copy. So it's been used for fantasy sports, it's been used for earthquake notifications, those types of things. And what you get out of a natural language generation platform like that is something that feels real and human. And so I was putting these two ideas together and thinking about the scenario where I just ask the internet a question, something goes off to what we would have called a website, gathers data, brings it back, creates content from that data, and then delivers it to me. And that's pretty cool, but it kind of scared the crap out of me because I was thinking, well, what do we get to design if that's going to be a dominant mode of engagement with the internet? And it really kind of resonated with me, and it kind of kept me up late one night. And what I came out of that experience with was kind of the call to action that I think we all need to have for ourselves if we are really going to make change for our clients and make change for ourselves and for our companies. And that is that we need to be able to embrace change much more deeply and more readily than anyone else. And if we can do so, that gives us a major advantage in working in this rapidly changing digital context. Because that's really what's happening, right? We're trying to design meaningful, delightful things in a context that is continually evolving, continually adding more complexity, and when our role is to bring simplicity and clarity and a sense of purpose to it. So being able to embrace that role as a change agent is more than just a fancy title you might throw around. It's really asking yourself to fundamentally get beyond what got you where you are and embrace something that might get you where you need to go. Because when we look at the work that we do, ultimately, designing in the digital space, it's not about making the website or making the app. All of those things are just elements that put the brand in the hands of your customers and enables your customers to create value for themselves. And Jerry McGovern, who's a great thinker and talker about these types of things, expressed it incredibly well. He said, design now is less about controlling the design and more about designing the controls. And liberating yourself from this kind of rigidity that we may have learned our crafts in, and opening yourself up to design as a practice and being able to have methods and ways of kind of evolving your own perspective and your own position within that process. So I thought we'd look at that concept a little bit, and I'd ask anyone here, who here has worked on a website design project? Almost everybody, excellent, that's what I like to see. So when you say I'm designing a website, ultimately that's a shorthand of saying there's maybe at least 30, possibly a lot more things that are happening. And when you look at each of those things, these are important steps in a design process. And each one of them requires skill, each one of them requires empathy, and God knows it requires a lot of enthusiasm and just kind of stick to it, get it done, energy, to be able to deliver on this. But as digital continues to evolve, the actual act here is not doing one individual thing and then moving on to the next thing. The real magic of the work we do is in how we connect these elements together, how we let them inform each other, how they inspire each other, how they kind of clash together and create little sparks that might be kind of interesting. And if you've ever worked on a large, complex web design project, it kind of feels a little bit like this, right? This looks like kind of most Tuesdays to me. It's this kind of pinballing feeling, right, where you move between one perspective and another, and you're kind of bouncing around, and you're using a lot of energy. And ultimately, our role here is to understand that each step in the process is critical, but that is not the role of design. When we're working with these networks, when we're working with complexity, design becomes the act and less the artifact of what it is that you're actually contributing at each step. And if we can start to think about that, design as an action, a positive action with purpose and moving things forward, it really starts to liberate you a little bit from any of the rigidity that you may have in your practice, in the work you do as craft, and allows you to kind of rise up above that and really deliver design at a new level of value for your own role and for the companies that you're working for. And that's really, really important, because this shift in context, the water in that goldfish bowl, as we've heard this morning, is ultimately about how you take complexity and you create simplicity so that you enable a sense of connection. And this is something that business tries to do in many, many different ways and has tackled over time. They've called it research and development, innovation, synergy for a while when they're bringing different business groups together. But all of those things are just code words for design. Everything that organizations are trying to do today is an expression of design in one form or another. Because like the steps in the website process, most of the different components exist already. Golden's example of how they can put that experience together for beta breakers. The innovation there was, how do you take what's possible and focus it so that you can bring order to it and enable yourself to create meaning in an age of connection. And that is ultimately the role of design. We're driven to create order and to create meaning. And so I thought, with that idea in mind, it's really important that we can understand how to apply design, not just to the function of our roles, but to actually practice design every day, in every interaction, and think about your participation in any step of the process, and how do you open that up, and how do you invite people in, and kind of create that openness and that energy that really, really good design work needs. And so we've thought about that question a little bit at our agency, and I wanted to share today maybe 3 different examples of the types of connections that we've tried to make to move our work forward. And those are around connecting around purpose, building bridges between different perspectives, and storytelling. And so each of these examples that I'll share are kind of from active work that we've done in our agency. And we've just tried different things, right? We've really tried to innovate within the process and understand our role is not just the maker, but the person who's building the context as well that the product gets made in. And so connecting around purpose, I think, is one of the most important elements that we need to be able to articulate to each other. And when you describe your role on a project, you can get very, very deep and detailed about your specific skill set. But what we found is as projects grew in complexity and they spread out over different disciplines and longer periods of time, that sense of purpose that's there at the start of a project sometimes withered a little bit and some of the sparks faded away. And people were asked to make design decisions in different contexts and different perspectives. So we thought, how can we get teams to really connect a little bit more around purpose? And so we developed a very, very simple framework that we call the 3 keys. And we utilize this at a design kickoff. So the team will have been briefed, they'll understand the project parameters, there'll be a strategy that's been developed and delivered. And so the team knows kind of the area that they're working in. And once that's been defined, we ask them 3 pretty simple questions. We ask the team as a whole, what is the value you intend to create for your customer here? What's the benefit of that value to the business, who is our client? And what contribution do you intend to make to the craft of experience design and building and making these things? And these are questions that as individuals, we may ask ourselves here and there along the way. But we found that when we ask it of a group of people, 2 very, very interesting things happen. The first is that it asks people to think about the outcome and not the process. And that's really, really important for us, is the work we want to deliver has to be about creating a positive outcome at the end of the day. And so when you start to see people thinking about outcomes and not role or process, they start to talk about things in a different way. And they see the opportunity. And when that happens, they start to make commitments. And that's really, really important. They make commitments to themselves. I'm going to try and get this done. And they make commitments to each other, which are really kind of the energy that gets any project all the way through a long design and build cycle. And this idea of having time in your process to just sit around with the other builders and designers and say, what are we here to do? Right? What commitments can we make today that we can try and make manifest in the world in 3, 6, 9, 12 months, whatever it might be, is really important. It really allows a team to form with a clear sense of purpose. But the other benefit that we've found in using this process is that when you incite this conversation, people start to talk about it not in terms of their craft. They start to talk about it in a new language that they create for themselves. And when you give a team an opportunity to create a vocabulary for a project, what you're really doing there is empowering them ownership of this story. And you're letting them take it where it needs to go. And so 6 months later, when you're in a QA cycle and a developer has to make a decision, they can make a decision not based on the context of that moment. Oh my God, we got to get this thing ready to ship. It's really complex. I'm struggling with finding the right design solution in that moment. But they can connect that to the story that they've told themselves and that they've committed to as a team. And enabling people to understand the intent and the purpose behind design all the way through the process, for us, I think has kept the energy that's so important for any design process to move forward. So we call this the 3 keys. We've used it on a number of projects to date, and we're continuing to learn the impacts of it, but we felt it's been pretty valuable in really making connections within teams around a clear sense of purpose. The second type of connection I wanted to talk about is building a bridge. And as we've talked about, heard from many of the speakers this morning, any good, serious design process is going to be grounded in some level of customer insight. For us, we tend to follow a customer journey map and personas, and that's kind of the foundation level of understanding this customer journey. But there's also other inputs, obviously meaningful inputs into the design process. And one that we really wanted to make sure we understood how to engage correctly was the brand promise. And when you start to get into the brand world a little bit, sometimes what you see there is maybe a little bit of an aspirational word salad. There's not a lot of kind of energy there. But if you can find a way to connect what it is the customer is thinking and feeling, what the brand is struggling to communicate about who they want to be, there's again a way to make a really meaningful connection there. So we use a very, very simple 2x2 framework. And I'll show you an example of a project that we use this framework on for a client of ours in the higher education space. But when you just kind of put these little quadrants together, you have an opportunity now to think about what are these axes, right? What is the frame of this journey that we're thinking about? And so for our client in the higher education space, we took from the customer journey map, the emotional journey, how their potential students were thinking. And we started to map that, and we were really looking for this sense of flow, right? Where does this journey start, and what is the logical next step? And so, this is very late millennials, early Generation Z. It started with a very strong sense of personal confidence. And they were looking for somewhere that they could be appreciated, right? Where can I shine? Where will I be challenged in the right way for my abilities? Will it be somewhere that I belong? But as they moved through that emotional journey, they kind of got to a precipice of, well, okay, am I ready for this? And that's a really interesting point for them because that's a moment of self-discovery as well. So that's kind of an interesting journey, but it's not a very exciting journey. It starts at self-confidence and ends at, oh, I don't know. So in order to build this experience, then we looked at the brand, and what did the brand have to say about the rest of this journey? And for this client, they had a very, very well-articulated brand perspective, and it was grounded in the practical application of learning and really giving their students not only the knowledge, but also kind of the will and the way to make change. They talked a lot about passion, but applying that passion in meaningful ways, and all of it was grounded in this very, very strong sense of morals and ethics. And so that's kind of an interesting brand story, right? From this practical application back down to the moral grounding of it all. But as we use this framework, obviously there's an opportunity here to take this precipice that the students were reaching, and it was kind of sending them off in this direction. Well, is it worth it? Maybe I should just go where Becky's going. I should kind of just do that thing. But say, no, let's focus on this and let's really think about how we frame this up. And so when we looked at this, in this 2x2, obviously it started, on the x-axis as it's a story of moving from an individual perspective to finding the right community for me. And that's pretty obvious and not super inspiring in terms of a narrative. But when we looked at the vertical axis, it started with this strong sense of confidence that kind of waned a little bit. But when we looked at what the brand said, they were really telling a story of courage. And so we looked at that middle space and we said, we need to build a bridge for these people from confidence to courage. And when you have that sort of journey in your mind, that can inform and inspire the content strategy, the visual design, and it gives you a way into, not just understanding the customer or the user, and not just parroting the brand, as what it's trying to be. It gives you a way to actually make that brand promise real and to prove it in the experience that you're designing. And we found that using this little bridging framework really helps our teams understand that brand is not just a separate element. Our role is to activate that brand and prove those brand promises in a way that really fits in with the customer journey. And so we found some really good applications of this in a lot of projects recently. And the third framework that I wanted to talk about is probably the most meaningful connection that we can all make as humans, and that is story. So telling a story really gives you an opportunity to walk in somebody else's shoes on that journey with them. But not only to experience it, but to gain insight and empathy and really understand in a very powerful way what emotionally that's like. And insight and empathy and emotion are kind of key ingredients of any successful design. So when we think about a story, it usually has a typical arc and it has typical components. And we talked about the narrator of the story. We talked about the author of the story, who the reader is, who the characters are. And we started to think about, well, how can we use story as a framework to help our work continue to grow? And we were working with a great client of ours who's in the childcare space. And we were working on a 3 to 5 year vision for them of what could this organization be like in 5 years down the road if we were able to align around the customer and really help them take control of the future direction of the business. And so we thought about, well, we obviously need to tell this story in an interesting way. And so we created a video, but instead of putting our own voiceover on it, we looked at the other role that's in any story, and that is the storyteller. That doesn't have to be the author. You can tell lots of other people's stories and make them your own and find ways to make them relevant to other people. So we started this idea about the storyteller, and we asked our clients, would it be okay if when we put this video, this vision of the future together, that we ask you to tell that story to your organization? We had a really, really powerful strategy statement that Dave Winnicke crafted for us, and it was really focusing on the value of relationships. So we thought, well, the best way to build a relationship is to kind of give something to somebody else that they find value in, and then let them kind of reciprocate a little bit. So it was a little bit of a roll of the dice, right? We asked our clients to say, take this story, make it your own, deliver it to your audience within your organization in the way that you feel is most appropriate. And that gave the storyteller a sense of ownership, deeper empathy for the story that they were telling, and a responsibility for that story. So we'll share the story with you now, and I will do my best to play the role of storyteller today. So if we could go to the video, we'll take a look at a vision of the future. So for our clients, this story starts with a lot of questions. There are personal questions, professional questions, parenting questions. And they're at a very meaningful moment of change in their lives. It's a time of great joy, but also a very challenging time, especially for this customer who is looking to go back to work and has to understand how to manage that relationship. So as an organization, you can enable those relationships from the first moment. You can start to build real value because people are trying to deal with a lot of change by building these networks of support. And we can connect them with teachers, we can connect them with parents, and allow those relationships to grow wherever they grow, because we know that they're all going to be centered around the child. So understanding what's going to happen with your child, at a big level is obviously really important, but also at that first level. So let's share experience and insight and empathy. And over time, really capture that sense of growth in qualitative ways and in quantitative ways. And if there are questions, be there to help. As the expert in the field or as someone who can connect you to another person who has answers. Each day is an opportunity to deepen those relationships and extend learning deeper into the family's life. And as time passes, there are big moments and little moments. And understanding what each one of those means to the family means you can respond in a consistent way and deepen the relationship. Because it's not just an educational transaction for parents, it's an emotional investment in the future of their family. And if we can be a partner in shaping that future, we've earned a really meaningful role in the customers' lives, preparing them for their future through relationships that help us teach, learn, and grow. So that's the story that we put together. And it was very tempting to try and own that story, right? And say that we want to be able to make this happen. We're going to deliver this. But ultimately, for us, it's not about each of the elements that make up that story. It's the ability to connect all those elements in new ways that enables you to create value. So not thinking just about craft, not thinking just about control and ownership, but thinking about opening this whole design conversation up to everybody in partnership, and bringing everybody's energy on board really helps you create that kind of value. If we think back to the water in the fishbowl at the start, the clicker seems to be taking a break. There we go. The local water company doesn't have 2 hydrogen departments and 1 oxygen department reporting up the chain, right? Their product doesn't exist as individual elements. And in design, neither does ours. The change in context that we've been experiencing and working through is an incredible gift to us because it tells us that while digital is important, the connections we make are everything. Thanks for your time.